Is it contagious?
Have you seen a plague that isn't?
Yeah, nice. Hello, and welcome to Movies We Dig. This is a podcast where we talk about film and antiquity and how the two merge and everything in between. So I'm Colin McCormick.
And I'm Elijah Fleming.
And today we're going to be talking about A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum, directed by Richard Lester, the 1966 musical comedy based on the Broadway show of the same name. So, starting it off as usual, I'm going to kick it to you, Eli. What's your experience with this movie, and what's the context, and do we dig it?
I do dig this movie with like an asterisk, I guess. Mm-hmm. The same sort of asterisks I give some other things that I like, but I recognize as being problematic. Mm-hmm. But I first saw this movie in a Roman history class in undergrad. They showed us this movie, and it was a really funny. It was like the semester where I felt like I learned all of these crazy things, and I was like making all of these connections for myself. Mm-hmm. Like I was in like second year Latin, and I was in a Roman history class, and I was taking medieval Italian because I was an overachiever. And it was like all of these things sort of like smashed together at the same time. And I was like, I recognize stock characters, commedia dell'arte, like Plautine comedy. And I don't know. It has a special place, I think, in my early education of the classics.
Nice.
Yeah.
Good, because that's going to be really good, because I think you're going to bounce nicely off me.
Do you hate this movie?
Hate's a strong word, but I'll say that I think this movie, I don't dig this movie. I think I'm the wrong audience for this movie on like a couple of levels. One is like, I'm not a huge, it has like no sort of like hook of nostalgia for me in any way. I think I saw it for the first time. I think I was in college, maybe later, but not for any particular. Like I just saw it because I felt like I had to see it because everyone, I think like my parents had talked about it. It was just this, it had sort of a place in the sort of cultural remembrance of Rome and classics and things like that. But I don't remember much of it for the first time I saw it. I think my initial reaction was like, yep, that's a Roman comedy. And I saw it again just a few hours ago, and it hasn't really changed. I'm still like I said, I'm not a huge, I have no great love for, I like musicals as much as the next person, but I have no great love or nostalgia for like classic Broadway.
Sure.
Nor am I particularly invested in Roman comedy, just even as a professional classicist. It's not really my wheelhouse.
Yeah.
I'm like I was sort of telling you before we started recording, I had to brush up a lot on sort of my knowledge of Roman comedy in a way that I hadn't since I took my comp exams in grad school.
Yeah.
So it has no particular draw for me. And like the significance of seeing like Zero Mostel and Jack Guilford and all these other sort of huge classic stars on the screen together kind of is like falls a little flat. And then I think that draws into sharper relief the more like problematic elements that you touched on.
Yeah. I will say, like, this is not for everybody. And I watched like the first few minutes of it just in my living room out loud. And Nick, my husband, was like, no, no, please do not watch this out loud.
There's a couple of things that I was thinking about when I was watching this movie, and we can get at them in any order. I think the one I want to get to last, though, is like if you were to revisit if you were to remake this movie, how would we go about doing it?
For sure.
Because I think we've said before about a lot of these movies is that like any sort of take on ancient history or history really generally has a tendency to sort of say more about the time it's being made in or being produced in than the actual time period it's talking about. And I think this is kind of very obvious because like this feels like a very mid 20th century movie in a way that feels sort of, I think, very dated for like, I bet if you were to show this to a class of undergraduates today, they would be like,
why?
what the are you showing us? This is like so bad. But yeah, so there's a couple of things that I had sort of picked out on our list of things to talk about, and we can go about them in any order. And one of them is is just Roman, just kind of giving like a little background and context for like what Roman comedy is and how it works and how this kind of really is a Roman comedy, but it's also
it totally is
Broadway. And then just I kind of wanted like it spun me off on all these other ideas just about comedy, sort of at large.
Cool.
So if I don't know if you have a particular lead in to say. What's your experience with like? Because this is based for those listening. This is based primarily on the plays of a Roman playwright named Plautus, who lived probably around the 200s BC, something like that. Like I think 250 to 180s. That's about his date range. Mm-hmm. What's your experience with Plautus? Do you have any particular love or hate for Plautus?
I do like Plautus. I think I liked him as like a literature student, but not as a Latin student. It's very difficult, or I found it difficult to read Plautus. There's a lot of like sarcasm and dialectic, sort of clipped language, and it's sort of fast paced, and it's kind of like it is reading a play. So you think about like reading Shakespeare or anything else, it's way more fun to perform it or to listen to it. Reading it is kind of a slog, or it just is sort of more difficult. But I love Miles Gloriosus, which is one of the plays that this is based on. That was my maybe first Plautus play that I read like the entirety in English, and I think I kind of got it. I was like, oh, it's funny. I guess kind of.
That's the real test, is if you find it, because like you said, there's a medium issue. There's a couple of issues that sort of stand between reception of Plautus and us today as modern audiences. One is medium. Like we're reading this, not seeing it sort of, and even seeing it on, I think, the screen. I want to get back to this later because that was another thing I flogged. It's just the topic of movie musicals generally, and like whether or not they're a good idea. I think no, but I might be. There's a lot of, I think, theater people out there that disagree with me, or maybe just fans of Grease or something. But don't at me, or at me. I don't care. Fight me.
It's a hill that you will die on.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm fighting against theater nerds, then I'll take my chances.
As a former theater nerd, okay.
I also have a contentious relationship with theater nerds, sort of generally. I think it's from many years of being in the pit orchestra where I just sort of felt maligned and underappreciated, and these thespians just kind of flouncing around on stage.
Yep.
And I think I harbor a lot of resentment for them because of that. But where was I going with this? So yeah, one of the like barriers I think between us and Plautus is medium, and the other, like you said, is language, because Plautus is I mean, comedy. And this kind of bleeds into the other thing I wanted to talk about, because comedy is more than I think any other genre. I would say comedy is the most sort of bound to its like particular historical, cultural, social context more than. And so there's like, because we're not, 3rd or 2nd century Romans, nor do we speak Latin, we're going to miss out on a lot of the like the in-jokes, the puns, the metaphors, all the like the double entendres. That is like the thing that sort of defines Plautus's style.
Yeah. I remember, I think there was, I think it was Plautus. There was a passage of Plautus on a Latin exam that I took, and I very foolishly just like chose that one to translate, and I regretted it about halfway through. So I was like, well, shit.
Yeah. There's a thing that when you take a translation exam in Latin or Greek or something like that, like if you just have the sort of classic like sit down, translate, whatever, these 20 lines or something like that, you tend to pick your passages that you translate based on how you look at the first 2 or 4 lines or whatever, and you're like, like these are the ones I reckon like these ones I kind of have a sense on, so I'm going to do this passage. Then you get halfway through and you're like,
nope,
that was I fell into that trap. So yeah, Plautus, again, like I was saying, I kind of did a little bit of brushing up, in a way, like I was reminded of my comp exams when I was, but Plautus is kind of he's an interesting figure, because there's the Roman comedy. Where to start of like the untackling the knot that is Roman comedy, because
that it takes quite a lot from Greek comedy.
Yeah, I guess that's the first thing we should really talk about, is that Roman comedy in general is indebted largely to Greek comic sort of predecessors, particularly a style of Greek comedy called New Comedy. The most probably famous new comic that you could read if you're interested in Greek New Comedy is Main Menander. Again, this is not my favorite genre ever. I think but they tend to follow certain Greek New Comedy and then also Plautine comedy, and it's a debate in like literary criticism about how to like evaluating Plautus is such a tricky issue because it's so sort of deeply intertwined with Greek comedy, but also he is doing his own thing. Plautus is kind of one of two like playwrights that we have surviving plays for. There's something I was reading up. There's something like 130 plays at one point that are attributed to Plautus. We're not sure, and I think even the Romans themselves were a little dicey on that issue later, because later in history you get a guy named Varro who kind of goes through and he says like he identifies something like 20 or 21 plays that he's like, these are definitely by Plautus. Speaking of Plautus himself, we don't even know the guy's full name.
Yeah, no.
We think he's from Romagna, or like the part of Italy that's going to become Romagna. So he's actually not a Roman sort of proper. He's from the kind of Italian countryside at large. And the Plautus is, when you talk about Roman comedy, you also talk about Plautus and another guy named Terence, who, I don't know if do you like Plautus or Terence more?
I like Plautus more because I feel like whenever I read Terence, it wasn't funny. Like I didn't enjoy it.
I feel the same way about Greek New Comedy, and Terence is, I think, a little bit more upfront about he is really deliberately adapting like specific Greek plays for Roman audiences. But it also seems that Terence's audience, or Terence himself, were much more sort of familiar. Like they were kind of more Hellenized, we might say. So there's like, that's part of the art of Terence, is that he's relying on sort of the knowledge that like this is an adaptation, kind of almost in the way it makes me think of like when there's, say, like American adaptations of foreign films that are hits, like Death at a Funeral is the one that jumped to my mind. Like there was a British film that I love.
That is a great.
There's an American remake I never saw. I think with Chris Rock.
It was not good.
Okay,
I did not enjoy it.
Another one, there was a movie called Force Majeure that was, I think, by like a Norwegian filmmaker, and then there's a remake. It's called something else, but it's starring Will Ferrell and Julie Louis-Dreyfus.
Oh, I know what you're talking about. When they're on the
it's the one
or something.
Yeah, it's like the movie is based on the original movie. Force Majeure was inspired by this viral video of like, I think at like a Swiss Alp like ski resort, and these people are out sitting, or they're like sitting out on the balcony, and there's like a controlled avalanche. Like the ski rangers are gonna like deliberately detonate like part of the they're gonna deliberately detonate like part of the slope to like force an avalanche to make it safe. And the avalanche is like getting kind of like disturbingly close, and you can see like there's this like man at a table with his family, and he like gets up and runs away from his family. And the filmmaker saw that video, was like, what, like, how do you go? And like the whole premise of the film is like, after that happens, like, how do you go back and like look your wife and kids in the eye after you like abandoned them? And so that movie, I haven't seen it, but it's supposed to be fantastic. And there's the remake with Will Ferrell and Julie Louis-Dreyfus, which I haven't heard any word of it.
No, I don't know.
I have another whole thing we can go about the state of comedy in America right now, but let's bring it back to Rome. So
because like while Terence was sort of just doing remakes, Plautus was more like using the tropes and sort of creating different stories, right?
Yeah, there's not as much of like a one-to-one correlation, I think, with Plautus. And there's also funny, here's my own little headcanon. I don't know if you watch South Park at all, but there's two characters in South Park named Philip and Terrence who are like this Canadian comic duo, and I have been like, I cannot find any evidence to support this, but I'm like convinced that they're an homage to Plautus and Terrence. But I have no idea. That's just my own, that Philip and Terrence are, I mean, but they do kind of trade in the same, like, I guess you might even call it like lowbrow.
That makes
sort
sense.
of comedy.
Yeah.
But yeah, like, but Plautus, like, it's the bones are there. But one of the things about Plautus is it is sort of deliberately being adapted to Roman sort of, like, there's a lot, like you were saying, there's a lot of linguistic jokes, there's a lot of like puns, wordplay, little kind of like oblique references, kind of like, so there's a lot of, and so like when you kind of study it in like a formal class, I had a professor once say that he was a linguistics professor, and you would think that the conferences in linguistics on humor, you would think would be like a hoot, because it's like, jokes all the time. In fact, they're apparently the most boring of any conference you could go to because it's people explain.
Disappointing.
Yeah, because it's people explaining jokes formally in academic panels, and that's the kind of problem. It's hard to one of the things you've arrived in the study of Latin if you find like a joke, if you can recognize a joke, because humor is just culturally and across languages like the hardest thing
for sure.
But yeah, Plautine plays and the plays that the Greek plays that they're kind of inspired by, they tend to follow certain conventions.
Yep.
You'd say.
Yep. So they're pretty formulaic. Usually, it's I feel like most of them sort of boil down to boy gets girl or slave gets freedom,
or both,
or both at the same time.
Some combination. Yeah, it's somebody's either comes into. Someone either gets married or comes into a bunch of money or gets freedom or some combination therein.
Yeah. And so there are stock characters, much like Commedia dell'arte in the Italian tradition. So there's usually like the clever slave, the lovesick idiot, I guess.
I call them the idiot lover boy.
Yeah.
There's there's an old man character. Very often there's like a pimp character or some kind of like slave dealer or something like that. There's usually a character called the parasite who's usually a slave.
Yes. Yeah.
And they're kind of like they just exist. They're kind of a comedic. I mean, they're all comedic relief, but the parasite's joke boils down to basically like, I'm just trying to get food. It reminds me of in the Avatar when they. In the show Avatar, when they go and they see the play about themselves, and like the version of Sokka is just
about food.
Yeah, he's like, I'm starving here. That's like every single joke is like just boils down to like, hey, I'm hungry. The parasite is just always trying to get a free meal. There's usually like if there's a soldier, the soldier is usually kind of like a braggart. And so you have these stock characters, and the plots, like you said, are they follow general conventions, and that seems to be it's sort of easily recognizable. And I guess the thing we should also say about just sort of ancient tragic performance in general is I think part of the thing that leads into this is the nature of the performance itself, because they're wearing masks. And so when you see a certain mask come on, like, oh, it's this is the clever slave or the old man or the soldier. They're going to have a mask design that's very evocative, and expressive of that kind of. So it paints in very, very broad strokes.
Yeah. And they were usually performed like outside, sometimes on like big steps of theaters, or like public buildings, like a temple or something, not necessarily always in a theater. So they have this sort of very accessibleness to them. Like it feels sort of like a lot of people would recognize and see this. It's like kind of like a sitcom almost.
Yeah. I would say that's actually a really good, like one of the ways I think I've explained the difference, like Roman comedy and also like Greek new comedy, which are kind of in the same generic wheelhouse versus, obviously we didn't mention it, but if there's new comedy, that sort of presupposes that there's an old comedy. And old comedy in Greek is Aristophanes, generally. A lot of the most famous sort of comedies by him, things like Clouds or Frogs or Birds or those plays. The way I kind of have explained it, and I'm not sure if this is true, and I think other professionals listening in might sort of wring their hair. Or do you wring your hands or your hair?
Well, you can wring either, but I believe it's your hands.
Okay, so they're gonna ball up a fist and shake it at Colin.
Yep.
But the way I've kind of explained it sometimes is like old comedy is kind of like the Daily Show in its aims. Like it tends to make fun of like political figures, or like current events, something like that. Like a play like Lysistrata is sort of talking about the Peloponnesian War, or in Aristophanes' plays he has sort of parodies of famous politicians on stage, things like that. Or even like, I don't know if you've ever seen In the Loop. It's kind of this British American, like that's kind of like old comedy, because it's like it's like mocking the political process and like the city state, and it's just kind of farsing. Like it makes fun of Socrates among other things. I really like. There's a bit in It's Clouds where they meet Socrates in the play, and he's got his like head he's in a basket because he's trying to learn about clouds. So he's gonna like get closer to the clouds to learn about them, and his disciples are like they have their heads in the ground and their asses in the air, so they can like commune with nature, and they get into a debate about like which end a flea farts out of or something like that.
Oh God.
Yeah, it's just kind of these like lampooning sort of political. Whereas, like you said, like new comedy is almost more like sitcom-y. It's like situational. Because and a lot of them, like this movie is like you say, it's like it's like every Plautus play ever.
It's all of them, pretty much, or it feels like it.
Yeah, and I think the three plays that get cited is that it's like Miles Gloriosus, Pseudolus, and I think Most Stellaria is the ones that because Most Stellaria is where the ghost house thing comes in. That's what that's from.
But it's also, I think, is that the one where they drug the girl, where they give her a sleeping potion, or is that
maybe I don't remember.
I remember that one being like super problematic in ways that were more obvious.
A lot of them are like that. Like Menander play. This is like when I read Menander in graduate school for the first time. I read the Menander. I was like, I hate this.
Yeah,
this is like it's not funny. The jokes aren't there, and like it just brings out the things that are really bad because it's very flippant about like slavery and cruelty and sexual violence and things like that. Which I think we're gonna get to in a second.
Yeah,
but so it's situational, and it's all like a lot of the like old comedy or Roman comedy. It's not old comedy, new comedy, Roman comedy, Plautus in particular. It's all like contrivances. It's like mistaken identities or people sort of confused about what, it's like person A thinks person B is this and person C thinks person B is this. And they have the humor that ensues from that kind of conflict. It's just like it's dramatic irony, lack of knowledge. Like the play that I think of a lot is the Menechme. That's the one where there's two twins, or there are two identical twins that have been lost, and they don't know that they're identical twins, and they're both in the same town at the same time, and everybody's like getting confused because they think one is the other or whatever.
Someone's always been like captured by pirates, or
there's always a usually like a slave or a young girl who's actually a sort of from a freeborn family that has been sold into slavery because they were kidnapped as pirates as a child.
But they all sort of like end happy. Like they all sort of like wrap up. Like the mistaken identities are always revealed. The kidnapped children are always like proven to be freeborn.
There's always like a ring or some kind of token that they have that proves that they're
so
who they say they are.
That's also in that sort of sitcom-ness is that it is all like kind of wrapped up almost at the end, or it's like, everybody is mostly happy. It like turned out okay. It's almost feel good.
Everybody,
I want to say
the characters that we're supposed to sort of root for end up married, and or rich, and or free or something, and everything just kind of everyone just kind of comes to terms. Like in Miles Gloriosus at the end, the soldiers just like all the tricks and contrivances that are happening around him. He's just like, yeah, I'm cool. Like it's all good now. Everything's all good. It's like, they say like the way you tell, like, how do you tell if a Shakespeare play is a tragedy or comedy? And so if it ends in a wedding, it's a comedy. If it ends in a funeral, it's a tragedy. Yeah. It's kind of, I think the general litmus test holds here as well.
For sure.
So
I don't think we could even explain the plot of A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum, because I tried to explain it to Nick and I was like, I'm sorry, I don't know if I can. When
you get into like the nuts and bolts of it, it is wild because there's like 20 things happening at any given time, and
all the time.
I don't know, maybe this is just me, but like this is like a 90-minute movie. It's like 98 minutes. It's not a long movie,
and it kind of feels like it drags.
Yeah, but for me, it felt like I was reading an old review back when it, like a Variety review from like 1966 or something like that. And they were like, it was so fast paced. And I was like, I did not feel fast paced at all. I felt like this was, oh my goodness. Because there's so much going on. Because there's, like we said, it's every play. It's every layer of contrivance just layered on top of each other. Because there's the... Pseudolus, who's our like clever slave character played by Zero Mostel. He's pretending to be free. He's trying to get the girl Philia to his master's son, Hero, so they can get married. But then she's promised to the soldier. I'm trying to explain it now, and I can't because I'm already like, well, but no, but also. So the Lycus, the pimp, he like the Philia at one point thinks the dad Senex is the old man character. is the soldier, but they also think everyone has plague, and the other slave, Hysterium, is people think that he's William, and everybody, it's all of this stuff going on, and I just kind of like, whoa.
Yeah, I think it's partially a feature of like trying to make a Broadway musical a movie.
I was just about to say, because like I wonder what it would be like to see this in live. Well, there's another thing. One is like this is a musical, but they cut out most of the songs
Yep.
from the musical. I'm not sure if that was good or not, but
Well, I feel like the music, or I guess the singing and dancing sort of like gives you more time, or like in the stage production probably gives more explanation, or really just like adds more depth into what in the world is happening, because
yeah.
it's, yeah, I'm trying to think of, I had this thought earlier and I should have written it down and now I can't think of it. But the songs did feel like they dragged. Like when she starts singing All I Am Is Lovely, I'm just like, oh my God,
Mhm.
can I fast forward? Like I don't
Yeah,
wanna.
and also part of it is again there's sort of the time, like maybe those songs might have slayed in the '60s, but like
Yeah.
the All I Am Is Lovely and it's like Good to Have a Maid. I listen to these now, I'm like, yeah,
Ugh,
I'm just kind of like,
gross.
I can't condone this,
No.
because it's a lot of like, I'm not sure if it's like, it's not really boomer humor or what you might call boomer humor, but it is
Yeah.
kind of like old man humor where
Mhm.
it's like I hate my wife. Like there's so many jokes that are like
I
I
hate
hate
my
my
wife.
wife, and like I just want to like I'm just like an old creepy man. I just want to like hang around beautiful and I just like leer at beautiful young women. That's which like there's a lot of comedy in the last sort of 70 plus years that has gone back to that well.
Yeah.
But I think in our year 2020, that well has dried up a little bit. The
Oh,
sort of
yes.
the gaze of this movie is sort of thrown into very sharp relief of like in a way that is very uncomfortable.
Yes. That's why asterisks.
Yeah. But to get back, like if we were to see this on stage, sort of performed live, not only would there be sort of more songs, I think that might help. Like I
Mhm.
think like seeing people sing. Like I think one of the big problems with movie musicals is like it's much for whatever reason it's so much more satisfying or entertaining to like see the songs performed live
I agree.
than to see them on the screen and
Mhm.
see the dancing and all that kind of stuff. And also just I think it would better like the in-personness, like being in the same room as these actors would really I think impress much better the like frenetic energy that this
Yes.
play has, because there's so
Yep.
many, because it's like the thing where like Pseudolus, this clever slave character, he's constantly weaving these little plots and these lies and these tricks about you pretend to be this person, you pretend to be this
Mhm.
person, I'll pretend to be you, we'll tell them this, we'll flip around the hourglass, we're doing this, and then he's like constantly like sort of like he's not even really one step ahead of the game. He's just barely,
Yeah.
it's like a juggling act. There's so many plates in the air,
Yeah.
and it's like that sort of tension. I was gonna say I think that tension would just translate so much better if I were like seeing a man
Yeah.
like have this kind of nervous, like barely keeping it together energy.
Because it's almost like he would be on stage the entire time. It's like a
Mm-hmm.
lot of the other characters seem to come and go, but because he is the
Yeah.
sort of like weaving this entire web and he is the spider like orchestrating all of this stuff, it would be a really awesome performance to see somebody do.
Yeah. Which also makes me wonder. I don't know if there's been a recent revival of this in any way. There was a
Mhm.
revival in the '70s that won some. When this musical came out on Broadway, it won Tonys.
Yeah.
The revival won some Tonys too. It was pretty well, like pretty widely received,
Mhm.
which is why they brought in a lot of the like original cast or,
Right.
or cast from the West End, like Leon Green, the Miles
Yep.
Gloriosus. Also in this play, like everybody, this is not unusual to Roman comedy, but everybody's name
Mhm.
actually just says who they are. I mean, it's less obvious because it's sort of in Latin. Like Senex just means old
Old man.
man. Domina just means like
Miss.
mistress, I
Yep.
guess. Yeah,
Mhm.
master of the house. Pseudolus just means like tricky slave
Yep.
in Greek. Philia just means like beloved, I
Yep.
guess. Um,
Hero.
yeah, there's no tricks there.
Oh,
Miles Gloriosus just means like
braggart soldier.
boaster. Yeah, braggart soldier. Exactly. Everybody is a trope,
Mhm.
and like that, and that like sort of works. Or I mean, it worked, I think, for Roman audiences. I wonder now also just this is a I was thinking to myself of just like, you know, like leaning that heavily into tropes is part of the, how do I want to phrase this question? The fact that like sort of Roman theater leans so hard into these kinds of trope characters and formulae and things like that, is it just because of the nature of how they experienced productions, things like that? Whereas like, you know, if we were in our sort of in our living room, I can watch, you know, 30 shows a day or whatever.
Right.
We sort of now, I think in the amount of just media we consume has led to like the need for more and more sort of the novelty and innovation and things like that. Cause, you know, you see a show and you're like, well, it's just kind of this show or it's like this other show.
Right.
But then I almost wonder if that's sort of in a setting where like Rome, where going to a show is like kind of a special event. It would be like,
Right.
you know, maybe accompanied like a religious festival, or it's not something you do constantly.
No.
So it sort of it needs to rely a little bit on those kind of tropes to really like cut right to the, you know, cut to the quick of things.
Right. Well, I think that makes a lot of sense because you couldn't have like a series of plays that like continued the same story because no one person would ever see all of them.
Yeah.
In order, I guess. Or
yeah, you couldn't have like long form, you know, like Sopranos type.
Yeah, no, that would never work.
Or, you know, your 12 seasons of The Office or however many. How many seasons of The Office are there?
I have no idea. A lot.
8. So, hang on. I'm going to go back and I'm going
to guess 10.
I'm more afraid of people coming at me for not knowing how many seasons of The Office there are. There's 9 seasons.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, like and you know, these people, and that also like leave room for like things to sort of change and grow, where it's like, look, we've only got a couple of acts to get to this play. Let's play to what the audience knows.
For sure. Yeah, so it could be somebody's first time ever seeing any play, or it could be somebody's like, you know, third time seeing a play, but they saw the other 2 years ago, but they all recognize the characters, they all would understand the plot. Yeah, no, that makes total sense.
Which is also kind of ironic now, maybe not ironic, but like it is kind of ironic now that the sort of immediate like shorthand that would be available to say like a second or first century audience or you know, in Rome is not available to us. Like if we were to watch, like we now need to be explained who and what these tropes are.
Yeah.
And also like there's other just big context, like the marriage and like customs regarding slavery are not what they were. So like that needs to be kind of explained, like the significance of like why the freeborn son can't just marry a slave girl.
Right.
Why it's important that at the end of the play, it turns out that she was actually freeborn all along. And then that like legitimizes their whole relationship.
Right.
Which like to us today would be like, well, you know,
just marry.
Yeah. Like why, you know, I mean, yeah, there's like things that would, there's like sort of like this like legal, cultural, social, there's so much like stuff that like we're just not there.
Yep.
So like ironically, it has to be like explained back to us.
Yeah.
Which leads me to sort of, like my two, we kind of have, I think, already answered this question, which is just like, how has this play aged?
Well, I think it's probably aged poorly because I think it is such a good reflection of an ancient Roman play. Like it really follows all of those tropes. It has all of those stock characters. It doesn't seem to like update those social and cultural contexts.
And I think even when it does, it updates them in a way that it's like it updates them in a way that is like appealing to, I think, like a mid 20th century comedic sensibility. Like the scene I'm thinking of is when they're doing this whole like sort of ball and cup game with Senex, the sort of master of the house, Hero's dad, and the soldier and his wife Domina. And Domina like goes up to the bedroom and she thinks that the soldier is going to like visit her, and Senex is also like sort of led to the bedroom, and he thinks that the Philia is there, who's actually his maid, and who wants to sort of, so he's like going to have an affair with his wife. And so they both, and so like the wife thinks she's going to have an affair with the soldier, and the husband thinks he's going to have an affair with the maid. And they both go in, then they kind of like turn to each other, and he's like, oh, my wife. And she's like, oh, my husband. And I feel like, to me, like that is like that boomer humor I was talking about.
Yeah.
Or like, there's so many jokes just about those two that are like marriage was like, you've been distant these last 29 years or something like that, or which to me that doesn't seem like that's not a Roman joke at all. That's a joke for our parents, that like being trapped in a loveless marriage for decades is like something they find funny or found funny. I don't know.
I've been watching Mad Men for the first time, and that sort of makes me think of, because that's in the 60s, and this sort of like
this play is
trapped
in
in
an episode of
loveless
Mad Men,
marriage.
I think.
Yeah. Trapped in loveless marriages, and the sort of like, like jokes they make on the train into the city, or like, I'm not gonna come home tonight, I'm gonna,
or like, the whole scene where Pseudolus brings Hero into the brothel basically, and all of the girls come out and they each do their like dance, and it's all like very racialized in a very uncomfortable way.
It's terrible.
And then so there's that, which again feels like a very like 20th century kind of and then there's the whole joke that all the girls are kind of like fawning all over Hero, and he's like sweating uncontrollably, and just this like and like that sort of thing again, like that that seems like like with the ways in which this play or this movie updates the humor, it updates them in a way that now feels it, so it's like doubly dated, where like the core plot is, is 2,000 years old, and then the jokes or the updated humor are still dated because they feel like 70 years old. I feel like if we showed this to Zoomers, they'd be like, "This is disgusting."
I'd be like, "What is this? Why are we watching this?"
There'd be so much like you'd have to explain it twice. You would have to explain both the like Roman context, then you'd be like, well,
but also the 60s.
Like humor in this, and I was wondering, like, because a lot of like sort of those classic, I mean, so many like classic, I'm doing air quotes, comedies have like aged pretty poorly. I'm thinking particularly a lot of 80s comedies, like things like Revenge of the Nerds, which like you watch now and you're like, these guys are like, should go to jail.
That's no good.
And or like, I don't know, like Family Vacation.
That's so bad. I remember being so uncomfortable watching that.
Yeah.
Like,
I mean, that's like the joke when Chevy Chase is in Community. Like the joke is that he's like so out of date and like doesn't realize how like wildly inappropriate he is at all times. Which is not unlike, I think, the real Chevy Chase. There's an interview with Donald Glover where the interviewer basically asks, the interviewer basically asked Donald Glover, like, what's it like to be, working with Chevy Chase, like comedy legend? And Donald Glover's answer, which I really liked, was basically like, it's fascinating to watch a man who was once at the top of the world now not be top of the world, and like reconcile with that in like an uncomfortable, like flailing way.
Yeah.
Because apparently there's also all sorts of backstage drama with Chevy, and he like left the show early. But so there's like, this movie has become, because like we said, the comedy is very like specific in its sort of scope. Like what people find funny 30, 40, 2,000 years ago, doesn't
it doesn't translate.
That's not to say that none of the jokes in this work for me.
Oh, yeah, I agree. Was one a good year when he has the bottle of wine?
Yeah, or just the first, I think it's like one of the first scenes where Hero is like trying to send like a pigeon with a letter to Philia, and he like ties the note to the bird and he throws out the window and it just falls right to the ground. And there's like, you can see there's like 10 other birds also with letters tied to their feet down there. Like, that's good. There was a blink and you miss it line, but it did get like a big like aha. There was very few parts in this movie where I like laughed out loud. And one of them was like the one is a good year, one was with the birds, but the other one, there's a brief line, it's like a blink and you'll miss it, but the soldier is like recounting his like, he's like doing his memoirs and the scribe's writing it down. He goes, now as we all know, Gaul today is divided in 8 parts, which I was like, It's funny if you've read Caesar, because the first lines of Caesar are Gaul is divided into 3 parts, and anyone who took Latin in the last like 100 years probably read those lines and would just know that all of Gaul is divided into 3 parts. It is a fact.
I do think that Miles Gloriosus was my favorite character.
Oh, he had another line. Yeah,
Like, stand back, I take large steps.
I was just about to say, I was like, he said that line, I'm like, all right, this is good. He's got that, like, because he's played by, like, a Leon Green, I think, is this classic, like, West End actor. He's got this bass voice, he's like, oh, I'm Bragot, and he's like, does the whole, like, he's got that, like, a vibrato, like,
That
trembling,
voice,
like, operatic.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That I think just kind of works.
Oh, it works so well.
We haven't mentioned this yet, but probably, I would argue, the biggest star in this movie, which I didn't even recognize because he was very old, Buster Keaton.
Yeah, well, didn't he die after this?
He died the same year this movie came out. Yeah, this was his last performance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
He was very old, or he was very sick.
Mm-hmm.
And I think he was giving people on set a lot of like, he was freaking them out because he did a couple, like, pratfalls, and people were like, "Oh my god,
please stop!"
Yeah, it was like, could you imagine, like, being on set, like being on the set that killed Buster Keaton?
Oh my god,
that'd be, yeah, like, can't ever live that down. And there's a bit of, like, Buster Keaton-esque, like, there's the whole chariot chase scene.
There's a lot of, like, slapstick-y, which gets me. I laugh at that. That's funny.
Yeah. The whole bit of, like, the chariot comes off the horses and is kind of, like, riding around. Yeah, there is a fair amount of slapstick, the everything with the acrobats.
Or just, like, hero, like, keeps falling down. Or
he also he was sort of known, I think Michael Crawford is the actor, and he, I think, is sort of known for his, like, practical, like, stunts. Like, there were some other productions and stuff where he was in where he was really good at, like, falling down stairs and things like that. Which he does a lot in this movie. That hero, I mean, I don't really have much to say about the individual characters other than that, like we already said, they're all incredibly sort of trope. They're just these sort of crystallized tropes. But he really also adds an element that I think is not necessarily in, like, the adolescents, that the young lover kid who's, like, usually just in love with some girl in the play is not I would say, not usually quite as dumb as I think Hero is.
Yeah. It's maybe a bit more like a cipher for the audience. It's like you want to root for the young kid, so he's maybe not usually quite as dumb.
Maybe, I don't know. Yeah, because I don't really want to root for Hero.
Oh, not at all. I don't want to root for any of them. Like, it's one of those stories where it's like you kind of hate everybody, but you, like, love to hate everybody.
Yeah, and that's the pseudoless character, and, like, those characters, this clever slave, the servus Plautus, is just like, this, like, tricky slave trope is kind of like, he is a character that you kind of he's supposed to be a character that you sort of like despite yourself. Like, he is, like, swindly and dealy. They introduce him in the movie as, like, he's the laziest, like, lyingest, trickiest, or whatever.
Yeah,
he's the worst slave ever. But, like, there's a little bit of charm. I think Zero Mostel, like, he's pretty charming.
Oh yeah, I mean, as the character, I think, is charismatic for sure, but you're kind of like, stop it.
Yeah. I mean, the other, like, I think the other, like, I think this is, a fault of both the source material and just the production of the times it came out. But Philia is really just the most passive character ever. She has no
agency at all, really.
Yeah, where she just, like, she goes to Hero's house. He's like, I'm in love with you, and she's like, okay. I guess I'll be in love with you too. But then she's like, I'm gonna go to the soldier.
She's like, yeah, I have a contract, so I have to do that.
And she doesn't really seem like I don't really know at any point what Philia does or doesn't want. She just seems like she's just gonna do, like, she's this weird, like, there's like not a male wish fulfillment character, but she's like this idealized, like, male gaze, like this, like, like the whole song "All I Am Is Lovely" is like, I mean, you can do a feminist sort of take, like, really, not even take down of this whole piece and just tear it apart, because there's a lot to be angry about.
Oh yeah,
from a feminist perspective, just the way how sort of passive and objectified women are in this whole thing.
But I do think that is partially, I think, from the double whammy of both of the time periods. Because I think one of the Plautus plays, like, the female character doesn't even get a line. Like, she's just, like, there. Her presence is just either on stage or just, like, in a bedroom.
They're afterthoughts. And Menander is like that. Menander plays are like that as well. They're just, you know, they exist to get married. They're, you know, for men to compete over and things like that.
Yeah.
Which my what was about to say. So like, the question actually, so we said that this movie kind of, like you said, suffers from the double whammy of being doubly dated.
Mm-hmm.
Were you to sort of, if someone were to like come to your death, like say you were like a producer or whatever, or a director, and someone like was like, look, we want to do a funny thing happened on the way to the forum, or not even like a revival of this, but let's do like an adaptation of a Roman comedy. Because I have a thought, because I think it's not impossible to totally make a smart, like updated comedy based. Because I'm thinking particularly, I know we did we see this together, but the Little Hours.
Yes.
I might have shown it. I'm kind of obsessed with this movie, but it's a sort of modern take on the Decameron, this medieval Italian sort of farce, loosely based, I would say.
Sure.
It's starring
yeah.
like Aubrey Plaza,
Mm-hmm.
and like Nick Offerman is in it, and John C. Reilly, like all these big sort of stars.
Yeah. It's hilarious.
Yeah, very, very, I think very smart, very, very funny.
Yes.
I think it is possible. I think you could, like, the bones of Roman comedy are like not necessarily like could you do something like that with, say, like Plautus?
Yes.
Maybe not Terrence.
Maybe not Terrence. But yeah, because I feel like Little Hours specifically like takes so much of like the weird raunchy character of like Boccaccio and the Decameron and makes it like very female empowered. It's like all of these nuns are like crazy to have sex with this guy, and so it's like it keeps that same like very raunchy story, but they're all like, it's the women are the main characters, and like they're making all of these decisions, and they're like running off into the woods to be witches, and
I love the witches part, like kills me. Where what is it, Kate Micucci's character like ruins the witch orgy.
so good. It was great. So yeah, I feel like you can definitely use a lot of the tropes and the bones of a Plautine comedy and make it something very smart and very funny.
I think like truly like yeah, like a play involving two identical twins being mistaken for one another, like that. I'm not sure that will ever like
not be funny.
I mean, you could do it better or worse, but like I think that can still be fun. Like we're laughing about it just thinking about it. Like or the idea of, you know, just say there's two young lovers, you know, we can you know, do away or update the sort of the control slave, you know, free power thing, or make it so like just like literally we just give the female character like more voice, make her the central character, make her even you could have a female slave who's the pseudolist type character.
That would be really fun.
Wheeling and dealing, like just the idea of like the slave sort of wheeling and dealing beneath the master's house, the master sort of being dumb, slaves sort of winning their freedom. I think like it could totally work. I'm not a comedy writer, so I'm not the one to do it. But like I could see it happening. I don't think like,
well, yeah, because it is so like sitcom-y, I think of like all of the adaptations of the modern adaptations of like Shakespearean plays, and how like 10 Things I Hate About You is actually a much better story than Taming of the Shrew, which is which is very terrible and misogynistic, actually.
yeah, that's a good example. Like you could also do that. Like I'm reminded of there's an Onion article from years ago that's like revolutionary Shakespeare director to set Shakespeare play in time and place Shakespeare intended. And it's like, because like, you know, so many like it's like it's, you know, Macbeth, but it's like, you know, the Pacific Theater in 1941 or whatever, or not 40 wouldn't be the Pacific Theater wouldn't be in 1941, but like the you know, World War II, or like like you know, you think when you think of the Merchant of Venice, you think of the streets of, you know, Los Angeles in the late 60s. You know, or like West Side Story, you know, all that stuff. You could always do that. Like you really just take the sort of bones of like the contrivances that this play kind of like revels in, mistaken ideas. I think like there's also a really great comedy to be had. Sometimes like just go dumb and it can be really funny. Of just there's a great comedy to be had. Just be like, we want to party in my dad's house, and he's coming home too early, so let's tell him there's a ghost in the house. Which is the most Stellaria. It's one of the plays that, you know, it's just like, I want to party in my dad's house while he's gone. So it comes into a ghost story that just like spins way out of line.
Yeah, that sounds like it could be like a Superbad-esque movie. Like, and that would be funny.
I mean, there's another thing, just like this is a thought that's been on my mind, partially just because of like a lot of the media I consume and like other podcasts I listen to and things like that. But like comedy today in, the late or 20 America is in kind of a weird place. And there's been, I linked, there's a couple articles in the doc we share of just like, there's a lot of articles and you can hear comedians, like I've seen like Kumail Nanjiani and like Jason Mantzoukas talk about this, that like comedy doesn't have the same presence in the box office today that it did like even 10 years ago, or like in like, think of like mid 2000s 2008, where movies like Anchorman or The Hangover or like Bridesmaids, like those knocked it out of the park. They were huge box office hits, and we haven't had one like that in so long.
That's true. Are we just all so miserable?
Yeah, no, it's just like, I mean, a lot of people, like, there's different things that people have pointed to. Like a common thing that people cite sometimes is that the international box office is so much bigger these days, like particularly appealing to like audiences in China, and like because comedy is sort of so culturally specific, it doesn't translate as well. Other things, like also that comedy seems to be generally migrating onto streaming platforms. Like there's really, really good comedy and like television and things to be had on like Netflix, for example. Another is that it's kind of getting sucked up by other genres, like superheroes. Like there's a lot of big movies that you would call comedies that are really that are also superhero movies, so you don't really think of them as comedies, like Deadpool, that are like doing really well at the box office, or like Crazy Rich Asians, like romantic comedies, which like they're comedies, but they're also, I mean, just thinking like in terms of genre, like romantic comedies are kind of their own.
Right.
I would consider them.
No, yeah, for sure.
Like I wouldn't necessarily put Crazy Rich Asians in the same sort of generic bubble as like Bridesmaids, for example.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And and then like modern comedies that seem to be of that ilk, like the sort of like Booksmart or Long Shot. Or there's other movies, like there's a bunch with Kevin Hart that have come out, but like nobody saw them.
Yeah. I loved Booksmart. Booksmart was so good.
Yeah, like I liked it too. And like, but nobody saw it in theaters. It was sort of it just didn't, it had really good it has like, not cult status, but it has like good word of mouth.
Yeah.
Everyone who sees it, I think, generally likes it.
Yeah.
But it just doesn't have the success. Like, I think a movie like that would have done much better had it come out like, 7-8 years ago, maybe.
Right.
That leads me to another sort of thought about just the issue with Roman comedy. I'm going to bring it back around, because the movie that I think is interesting to think about in relation to Roman comedy, and to Plautus in particular, is actually, I think, Crazy Rich Asians.
Tell me more.
And I'm going to explain. I want to explain my theory in a second, and here's why.
Okay.
Because like one of the things you could sort of come at Roman comedy for is being unoriginal, just being like a retreading of stuff Greeks have already done, a recycling of their plots, of their characters, things like that. But at the same time, I think the argument for Plautus is that he migrates that successfully to a Roman audience, and like the plays that he's adapting are themselves pretty old in Greece, but he's bringing in sort of Latin sort of wordplay and jokes, and he's really like situating, like there's a lot of Greek in the bones, and he's really situating it for his Roman audience. And I don't know if you, so that my thought, and this is sort of a half-baked thought, is that in some ways, like you could come at Crazy Rich Asians, not on the sort of cultural dynamic, but that it has a lot of things that are tried and true. Like its plot is very similar to a lot of romantic comedy plots we've seen. Simultaneously, though, it's also incredibly novel, I think, because it is locating this sort of tried and true plot into a new and a very particular sort of context, like this very specific context with like super wealthy Asians, then going to Singapore, and like Chinese expatriates, and like wealth and class. And there's all these things that are sort of coming into play that are specific in work. And then you can, take like the general arc of like, I guess you don't see the meet cute, but like, these two characters are in a relationship. There are struggles in the relationship. They have a falling out. They have a beautiful reconciliation. Nothing like we've seen that. But I think what made Crazy Rich Asians so sort of like appealing to people is that the way it took that sort of plot and then put it in this very novel, particular, and like very relatable kind of, for I think a lot of people, situation. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah.
Or not, and for some people, for some, like very relatable because it talks like I think very real issues in like Asian American and Asian
Sure.
communities, but
Yeah.
then also for sort of us like outsiders like it sort of sheds light. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I can see that. Yeah, because
I
it's
might cut that whole rant out. I'm not sure if it tracks at all.
no, I can sort of see where you're going with that. But I feel like it would be different, or it would be even more like that if there was a translation element.
Yeah,
Like,
if it was something like it's more like if we took like yeah maybe a better it is maybe like Plautus is more like a movie like an adaptation of Death at a Funeral or something like that. But I think Death at a Funeral like fails where like Plautus succeeds, where like
yeah.
the charm that made Death at a Funeral so funny, I think was like a lot of it was like rooted in its Britishness.
Yes, I agree. I'm trying to think of, I guess, an American adaptation of a different.
Well,
Okay,
flip
well,
side,
wait.
The Office,
The Office, I do think is better than British
British
Office,
Office. Mm-hmm.
but this might be very controversial. I like the American version of Girl with the Dragon Tattoo better than the Swedish version, the movie.
Oh, that is a controversial take. I
Yeah.
haven't seen either. I'm actually I'm like sort of an anti Stieg Larsson. I've read the first two books and I had no desire to read the third.
I had a kick in undergrad where I just like read them all and we watched all the movies and I was a little obsessed. So it's okay.
Yeah,
It's fine.
I don't think I saw either the Swedish or the American version, so I can't comment. But my understanding is that the Swedish version is generally preferred to the American
I
version.
believe it is, and it's very good. It's like it's a great movie, but I don't know why I love Rooney Mara. She's a great actress, and I really liked her in that role.
Okay. Um, we've got we just hit an hour. I think I said pretty much most of the things I wanted to say.
Cool.
Did you have any last hot takes you wanted to share?
It bothers me so much in ancient or like ancient set movies when women wear bras. Like all of them have these like bodicey thingies and they're all strapped
Yep.
up and I hate it. It's so dumb.
That would lead me actually to my yes, I agree. There would be it shouldn't be so what's the word I'm looking for? I'm making a gesture with my hands, but like so compressed, not compressed, contained. I don't know.
Contained, yes.
The question I was going to ask you, I forgot to do, but it's just this movie's approach to it's like the set and the costumes, sort of generally.
I kind of think it's fun. It works. It's like dirty and messy and like everything is sort of smashed together and you can kind of see like little bits and pieces of like, oh, I recognize that's like a Pompeian wall fresco and it's painted on their house.
Yeah.
And, or
Mm-hmm.
like at the top of a balcony, it like looks like a sarcophagus like frieze
Yeah.
sculpture. And I'm like, well, that's kind of weird, but none of it stood out to me as like horrible. It's all kind of fun.
I only had one like pedantic classic sort of quip, and that's just none of the statues are painted,
Oh,
which
well,
they
yeah.
would have been. Everything's all the statues and the columns and the art and stuff like that is all like sort of stark white, which we know and have known for a while is not the case. Everything
Yes,
would have been painted up the wazoo.
for sure.
Yeah, I think it has a little bit of that case where it's just like it's just gonna stuff any and all sort of Greek and Roman art wherever it can.
Yes.
Like, there's little like reliefs in the walls that are like, I don't know, from like funerary reliefs or something like
Yeah.
that. Just kind of like shoving it all in one place.
But sort of like the busy, messy dirtiness of it all, I think kind of works.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's about right. Yeah, everything they like. There's a part I think like the girls are like stepping out of the carriage or something, and none of them they're all barefoot. I'm like, I would not want to walk barefoot
Gross.
there.
Yeah, it's terrible.
Domina, like her hair is done up in like a very
Mhm.
specific way that's like design. I think that's is it
Is it
Hadrian?
Faustina?
Yeah, there's like a very specific hairstyle where it's like all of the massive curls kind of
Yep.
piled up in the front. It's a lot of like. Again, I think this play is supposed to be set during Nero's Rome.
Yeah, did they ever say that?
I only know that because I read it in the Wikipedia. Maybe it's in the playbill. I'm not sure.
I mean, that makes sense. If they're just trying to situate it. I mean, yeah, there's nothing that I think screamed out any actual time period.
No, but it also like that's. I mean, I think like with Roman comedy and new comedy, like we said, it's because whereas like Aristophanes and that genre is very much rooted to like the political goings on of the 5th century in Athens when they were being written, or the 5th and the 4th century. And the new comedy is kind of like it could be whenever. It could have been yesterday. It could have been 100 years ago. It's sort of like.
So that works. That's, that's fine.
Yeah. The cultural, the sort of historical context is implicit, not explicit. It's not about, they're not talking about anything that's happening sort of politically. It's more just like the kinds of humor that they're going for. And like we kind of said, it's situational. I just thought a task. Like, so Roman comedy is almost so formulaic. I just had an idea. Almost if you could task someone to write their own Plautine comedy.
Oh yeah. You could totally do
that. Like, I don't think it would be that hard. It's like, I've got these like trope of stock characters I can work from. Like, I think it'd be pretty, like, you're like not even a person. Like, I wonder if you could like program a robot to like, or like,
this has totally been done. Hasn't this been done? If we Googled this, will it come up?
Yeah, it's like a machine. Well, like they had a machine learning algorithm that like wrote a book of Harry Potter.
Yeah.
It's just like they fed it all of Harry Potter, and then I bet you could do that. You could like feed a machine learning algorithm like every Plautus play, and it could like produce a Plautus play. And I would very much want to read that.
Yes.
So any computer programmers out there, if you know anything about machine learning, hit us up to see if you could, like, if it's possible to train a computer to write Plautus.
Yeah, and then we'll make a movie out of that play.
And we'll produce it. I will fund, I will produce and direct, I will do the casting. We will produce this play that a computer wrote in the style of a 2nd century BC Roman playwright.
No one would see it.
All right. Yeah. Do you have any sign-offs?
I think that's it for me.
Alrighty. In that case, we're gonna do our farewell. So, as usual, you can find us on our website, movieswedig.com. You can also find us on Apple, Stitcher, and our Apple Podcast, Stitcher, and Spotify. Follow us on Twitter @DigMovies. And yeah, thanks for listening, guys. I like to think we're refining now that this is what, episode 10?
I have no idea.
I think it's episode 10. 10th time's the charm. All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye, guys.